How to Make Our Mental Pictures Come True, a series of easy lessons in the art of visualizing by George Schuebel, copyright 1922. Part 1, The Mechanics of Visualizing, How to Make Our Mental Pictures Come True. Chapter 7, Dark Chamber of the Mind. Another mechanical arrangement of the photographer's camera which serves to illustrate our study is found in the box-like compartment back of the camera eye known as the dark chamber. We find a similar arrangement back of the physical eye by means of which we are able to observe, recognize, and know the things of the outer world. In turn, the compartment in back of the physical eye is simply an outwardly fashioned dark chamber, representing an inner state of consciousness which we are able to establish at will in the exercise of our visualizing power, and which serves as a mental compartment, so to speak, back of the single inner eye of the mind, so that we can say there is a dark chamber of our consciousness just as there is a dark chamber of the camera. But in the same manner that the photographer has found it necessary to have an outward arrangement of this principle in the form of a dark compartment in his camera, so in visualizing, at least in the beginning, we shall find it necessary to have some outward compartment representing this same inner principle, some quiet room in some part of the house which can be made as dark as possible, and which outwardly will be a counterpart of and help to induce that darkened state of consciousness which is necessary in conditioning our mind for visualizing purposes. Let us familiarize ourselves for a moment with the purpose of the dark chamber of the camera in order that we may understand the principle which it outwardly embodies. The dark chamber shows the photographer the reflected light rays which the lens of the camera has caught, collected, and thrown into it as an imaged object of light. When he glances into it, he observes this light image by reflection. He obtains his perspective, his focus, by means of it. Also, he sees whether the proper quantity and quality of light is being reflected. So with the state of consciousness of which the dark chamber of the camera is a counterpart. It shows us the reflected light rays of our objective thinking which the inner single eye of the mind has caught, collected, and thrown into our objective consciousness as an object of thought. In this state of mind, we are able to see by reflection the object of our desires. We get our mental perspective, our focus, by means of this mental image. Also, it serves to tell us whether the proper quantity and quality of reflective thinking is present. The dark chamber of the camera might with good reason be called the illuminating chamber, since it conditions the image object and shows it to the photographer as an object of light, wonderful to behold. Similarly, when we enter our quiet darkened room and, by means of this room, into a space within our consciousness where all is quiet and subdued, we find ourselves peering within ourselves into what we might, with good reason, call the illuminating chamber of the mind. It is in this state of objective consciousness in which reflection of the object of our thinking occurs, in which we meditate upon and contemplate our imaged thought, in which we are able to get our proper focus toward our thought, our proper perspective toward it, and in which we are able to consider it in the right light. Somewhat later in our actual work, we will give more attention to the matter in which our thought image is brought into this illumined mental chamber, how it is there acted upon, and how it is subsequently developed. Suffice it here to say that the photographer would get a haphazard picture if he did not use this illuminating chamber, if he did not peer carefully through it at the reflected object which he is planning to photograph. For the most part, it would be ill-proportioned. Probably the light image would be too dim or too sharp or out of focus. And so it is in the matter of holding our thought object in that place in our consciousness where it is subject to reflection, to meditation, to where we can get the proper light upon it. If we do not see our thought object by this means, it will be reproduced haphazardly, as is now mostly the case in the spontaneous and undeliberated outward fulfillment of our inner desires. In the illuminating chamber of our consciousness, we must review our projected thought. We must procure our proper perspective of it, and we must judge there and then whether or not it is really worthwhile to bring forth into our outward realization. End of Chapter 7. Chapter 8. Will serves as mental tripod. We know that the photographer's tripod serves the purpose of steadying the camera during the time in which the outward object is being focused, concentrated, and transmitted, and during the time in which the light image of the object is being reflected and impressed. Upon the steadiness of this support, the distinctness of the result picture depends. As a mental principle, our fixed will, among other things, serves the same steadying purpose of the tripod. By holding our cameric facilities steadily directed toward the object in mind, by holding the object steadily in view during the time of focus and concentration, and by holding the mental light image of our object in place during the time of mental reflection and impression. It is upon the steadiness of this supporting phase of the will that the distinctness and good results of the final outward picture is obtained. However, it is generally and mistakenly thought that this holding function of the fixed will necessarily implies a tensive effort or strain of the mind, extending even to rigidity of the muscles of the body, but this should not be the case. The holding of our projected thought should not, in true visualizing, does not require any such mental state. It calls for an easy, meditative holding of our mental object in place and should be one of the most delightful phases of our visualizing work. End of Chapter 8. Chapter 9. Mind's Rangefinder. There is a function of the imaging faculty which, in visualizing, serves very much the same purpose as the range-finding device attached to a camera. Upon our conscious use of it later on in our visualizing work, much of our success will depend. We know that the range-finding device of the camera serves as a measuring principle whereby the photographer's object is brought nearer to him and enlarged, or is made smaller and more distant. So the range-finding faculty of the mind will serve as a measuring principle, enabling us to view our mental object at will, or with all the breadth of vision which the unlimited consciousness of mind allows, and which we will learn to cultivate as our work goes on. End of Chapter 9. Chapter 10. Enlarging camera device of the mind. There is an enlarging device attached to the more improved cameras whereby an object is seemingly brought nearer and enlarged to whatever extent the photographer wants his reproduced picture emphasized, or by means of which he can bring out this or that feature important to his picture as a whole. He is able to take the smallest picture and enlarge upon it to a degree where it can become, if he so desires, the major part of his reproduced picture. In visualizing, we bring into play a similar inner faculty, which serves the very important purpose of bringing nearer to us and enlarging whatever good and desirable thing in our lives we would like to see expanded and made larger by means of reproduction, helping us to bring out this or that already existing feature of our present outward environment, circumstance, or condition, so that we are able to take the smallest object which gives us happiness and magnify it to a degree where it becomes the largest part of our reproduced mental picture. In fact, the easiest and most successful method of visualizing is contained in just this principle of enlargement. We take the most desirable things which are already a part of our outward lives, be they ever so small, and begin to see them in an enlarged way. We find that it is easier to elaborate upon and idealize that which we already are or possess or have accomplished than to formulate objects in our consciousness which may involve an entirely new set of circumstances and conditions. End of chapter 10. Chapter 11. Mind's Camera Shutter. Another mechanical device which is a part of the camera and which lends itself in illustrating the mental mechanical apparatus used in visualizing is the shutter. This shutter, as we know, is immediately in back of the dark chamber of the camera and separates it from the film. Its particular purpose is to prevent the imprisoned light image in the dark chamber from coming in contact with the sensitized film in the back of it until released at the proper moment by the photographer. Our will serves a similar purpose of protecting our unimpressed thought image. Until we have properly examined our thought in the mind, until we have looked into it, so to say, until we have gotten a proper focus and perspective of the thing which we want to be, or do, or have, until we get the right light on it, the image thought is held from impressing itself upon the sensitive subjective film of the mind by the will acting as the mental cameric shutter. Rapid as the operation of the mechanism of the camera's shutter, this operation of the cameric faculty of the will is instantaneous, except in those instances in our deliberate visualizing where the time exposure is of advantage. Its manner of application will be touched upon later in our actual work. End of chapter 11 of How to Make Our Mental Pictures Come True by George Schuebel. Narrated by Rex King.